Well, hello. What do you think is the most important thing about a vaccine? Well, I've been reading up on this a little bit, and the most important thing about a vaccine is the shape. A virus has a special shape. It's like a ball covered in little protein spikes. The spikes enable the virus to break into our blood cells and infect us. The spikes are different for each virus. And to stop the spikes penetrating our body cells, our bodies need to make antibodies. An antibody fits the spike exactly. And each kind of virus needs a different kind of antibody. Well, to help our bodies create an antibody, a vaccine carries a little part of the virus cell, just the spike shape, the spike protein. It's called an antigen. Our bodies notice the antigen and then create an antibody to fit the antigen, an exact opposite shape, like a glove. Well, then when the full-blown virus comes along, from that blueprint, we can create lots of these antibodies and stop the virus from infecting our body cells. So, it's all about being the right shape. And that got me thinking about a verse from the Bible. It's about how Jesus, the Son of God, became exactly the right shape to save the world. It's in the Apostle Paul's letter to the church in Philippi, Philippians chapter 2, verse 8. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Just like the vaccine for a virus, the Saviour of the world needed to have the right shape and form. For Christians, Christmas is about one thing: the Son of God becoming a man. That he became man-shaped. He came in human form. And we believe he had to do that to defeat the sin that infects the world. The Bible teaches that sin is like a disease that we've all got. It started with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. They wanted to be like God, so they disobeyed God. We have the same problem. We want to be like God. We want to decide what's right and wrong for ourselves. We want to live for ourselves. We want to define ourselves. We want people to look to us as if we are something special. Now this just seems natural, doesn't it? We can't help it. We're all infected with this. But imagine coming to face to face with God. We'll be in big trouble. You must admit, even now, human selfishness and pride causes all sorts of terrible trouble. Jesus became human to deal with this problem. He became a man in order to become humble. Become humble. This was part of the shape of the Saviour. How did Jesus show his humility? In obedience. Absolute, perfect, ultimate obedience. Obedience to death. Humility that leads to obedience. Well, the opposite of humility is pride. And the opposite of obedience is disobedience. Pride leads to disobedience. And that's the precise root of sin. We think so much of ourselves that we reject God. And that's exactly what happened in the Garden of Eden. It's exactly what happens when we get angry when we don't get our own way. It's exactly what happens when we overindulge ourselves. It's exactly what happens when we lie. It's exactly what happens when we gossip. It's what happens when people grasp at power, no matter who they hurt. It's what happens when people are blinded by greed to the needs of the poor. Jesus took a form that was the exact opposite of that. It's like his human body is an antibody to sin. He was totally humble and perfectly obedient. He became obedient to death, even death on a cross. The cross is the shape of suffering and shame. It was the worst kind of punishment, reserved for the worst kind of criminal. To die on the cross is the most painful death. But the kind of people that the Romans put on crosses were the kind of people who no one felt sorry for. Now, I'm sure you can think of people who have done things that are so horrible and so evil that you think nothing is too bad for them. That's the death that Jesus died, labelled and tortured. That's how humble he became, the lowest of the low. The shape of the Saviour was a human form, but it was ultimately a man on a cross. But why? Why did Jesus go through with it? Why was he willing to die on a cross? Well, there was no other way. Sometimes there is no other way, is there? There's a recent and quite silly example of this idea. You know, the Bush Tucker trials and I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. I'm sure you enjoyed that programme. The celebrities, they had to go through some very unpleasant experiences. Either they had to eat something disgusting, usually some unmentionable body part of an animal. Or they had to get into a confined space with millions of nasty critters or crawling all over them. But why? Why did the celebrities go through with the Bush Tucker trials? Because they could just stop and give up. And saying those words, I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, it would all be over. Well, why did they go through with them? It was to get food for their campmates. It was to earn a reward for the whole camp. It was very unpleasant, but there was no other way. Jesus could easily have said, I am the Son of God, get me out of here. In fact, people walking past taunted him to do just that. But Jesus went through with it. He became humble, the lowest of the low in his suffering and shame. He went through with it because it was the only way to defeat sin. There was no other person who could do it. There was no other way it could be done. The Son of God became the exact right shape to save us from sin. Sin is the spike. It pierces our souls. It infects our hearts. It flows in our veins. It darkens our senses. It poisons our minds. It destroys our lives. Jesus came into the world and took our sin. The cross is the shape of sin. It's like an antigen, except it's not a harmless strand. It's like the whole of the virus across the whole of the world, all sucked together, like a lightning conductor taking all the electrical charge. And then Jesus was pierced with it instead of us. The prophet Isaiah, 700 years earlier, described what happened to Jesus. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him. And by his wounds, we are healed. It's not quite like a vaccine. In order to defeat sin, Jesus had to be infected by it and die. He had to take the punishment that sin deserves. He faced his Father's judgment on our sin in our place. But that means that we can be at peace with God. And peace with God lasts forever. In 2008, there was a remake of the 1970s TV show Survivors. But in the first episode, most of humanity is wiped out by a killer virus. It's terrifying. There are just a few survivors left who are immune to it. And these people roam the countryside and the cities. Some of the survivors are scientists who aren't immune, but who knew about the virus and locked themselves away. what all the survivors have in common is that they never got the disease. All that is except one woman, Abby Grant, who did get the disease, but then recovered. Uniquely, her body fought it and made her better. It turns out that this virus mutates and would eventually kill everyone. I'm not so sure about whether the science in this works, but in the story, Abby Grant got ill and then she got better. She would recover and survive. The scientists track her down and they realise that they have the cure. It's her. She's a walking antibody factory. Life-saving antiviral drugs can be made from her blood. But she has to suffer first for everyone. She has to be infected by the disease so she can resist it. And then everyone can be saved. Jesus died of sin and came back to life. He suffered and he recovered. His body was healed. Only he could do that because he is the perfect Son of God. Now his blood is the cure. The ancient writer, who's got a great name, Gregory of Nazianzus, he says this about Christ becoming a man. For that which he did not assume he has not healed, but that which is united to his Godhead is also saved. How do we get Jesus into us then? Is it like an injection? You can have a Jesus injection? Oh, no. But when we believe in Jesus, we become part of his body, not physically, but spiritually. We are united with him by faith, which means we're also united with other people who believe in Jesus. That's what church is. Those of you who are united with Jesus by faith, those united in his body, are healed. His blood is the miracle cure for sin, and it flows like it in our spiritual veins because we are his spiritual body. Through him, everyone who believes can be saved. Of course, Jesus changes on the inside like a vaccine. And that means we live his way, humble, obedient, sacrificial. For Christians, Christmas is all about God becoming human. We believe he became the right shape to save us. And we think that is wonderful news worth celebrating. So Merry Christmas to all of you. I pray you all stay safe.